Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Oldie lunch. My name is Harry Mount, editor of the greatest magazine in the universe, the Oldie. We're only here thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Orions, who have wonderful places to live. I've been there, just off the King's Road, sort of club, perfect for oldies, even though even children of 65 are allowed in. I'm only here as a poor substitute for the late, great Barry Cryer, who would tell a joke at these lunches, and he had a joke about absolutely everything. So I was looking up today any jokes related to Oscar Wilde, because we've got Oscar Wilde's grandson speaking later on. And he had a Stephen Fry joke. Stephen Fry obviously played Oscar Wilde in the film Oscar. And Barry liked this story about Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry met a man who said, "I wish I had 1/10 of your talent, Stephen." And Stephen replied, "Your wish has been granted." We've got 3 fantastic speakers today. Our first is a great oldie contributor. Ysenda Maxtone has written wonderful books, including Jobs for the Girls, How We Set Out to Work in the Typewriter Age, British Summertime Begins, The School Summer Holidays, 1930 to 1980. Terrific book, Terms and Conditions, Life in Girls' Boarding Schools, 1939 to 1979. And she's here to speak about Screams, Shrieks of Horror and Yelps of Pleasure from Modern Life. Ladies and gentlemen, Ysenda Maxtone.
Hello, very, very nice to be here. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, Harry. Can everybody hear me? Good. Well, I bet quite a few of us on our way here today have seen something that doesn't look right. But did we get around to reporting our sighting to the British Transport Police? I guess we probably didn't, because seeing something that doesn't look right happens about 3 times an hour these days to any of us with fastidious standards. There wouldn't be time to report each one. And even if we did see it and say it, we know for certain it would not be sorted. By the way, a Latin teacher friend of mine recently gave me the Latin translation for see it, say it, sorted, with all the correct grammar, the imperatives and the participle. Apparently it's vide, dic, rectum. Well, I'm not talking here about spotting mysterious unattended baggage or, God forbid, men brandishing knives, which were genuinely terrifying, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the people who happened to be on the 6:25 from Doncaster to London on Saturday evening. No, I'm talking about the small things which annoy us and needle away at our daily joie de vivre, such as those piles of discarded lime bikes lying on their sides on the pavement, and which seem to take up as much space as a whole herd of dead cows. And I'm talking about those miniature squirty fish-shaped soy sauce bottles that you see in the gutter, casually discarded by an affluent takeaway sushi guzzler. And I'm talking about those orange plastic non-benches you're meant to lean against in railway stations that are too mean to provide proper benches to sit on. And I'm talking about those incomprehensible instructions that suddenly appear on our card's digital screen. A new code must be entered for this data transfer. What on earth does that mean? And I'm talking about the man in front of you on the pavement who's walking 2 dogs and has got AirPods in both his ears, so he can't hear you trying to get past. And I'm talking about the damp, dirty, cotton woolly, Halloween-y cobwebs drooping from privet hedges a week after Halloween. It was tiny irritations like this that inspired my book called Screams, Shrieks of Horror and Yelps of Pleasure from Modern Life. I collected a year's worth of small irritations that make me and perhaps all of us go through the day in a state of barely suppressed rage. The brilliant cartoonist Nick Newman, beloved of oldie readers, did a cartoon for each month, encapsulating one of the shrieks. One was of a harassed-looking woman on a railway platform looking up at a digital signboard which said, Next irritation, 2 minutes. Too right. Now, I'm not quite sure whether my sharing of these many shrieks of horror makes the world a happier place or an unhappier place. Is an annoyance shared, an annoyance halved, or an annoyance doubled? I like to think that by analysing my fury at, say, the bewildering complications of other people's recycling rules, or the way people boast about their Wordle score, actually might make readers feel a bit less lonely when they too feel that they want to scream at such moments. Also, perhaps if you manage to spend a few hours every day being infuriated by tiny annoyances, it anaesthetises you against worrying yourself sick about the world's bigger problems. Well, for my talk today, I've collected 3 new screams for 2025. I thought you might enjoy them. The first one is this. Is anyone as annoyed as I am by the new style of lid? Due to an EU ruling of mid-2024, every plastic bottle in Europe now has to be tethered as it's called, to the rest of the bottle. I thought we'd left the EU, but it doesn't seem to have made any difference. If you try to wrench this lid off the bottle when you buy it, you cause mass spillage. But see what happens when you try to drink from it with the lid tethered. You have to drink out of the side of your mouth, causing water to spill down your front. I noted the way my husband tries to replace the tethered lid of the orange juice bottle after lunch. He sort of bangs it down, hoping it'll sort of go across the threads, but it doesn't seem to work. Well, I think the EU's aim was to make there be less litter in the world. But who in the old days ever used to throw away a lid on its own? I can't see how anyone would have done that. Either we kept the whole bottle and the lid, or you threw away the both parts, didn't you? So that's scream number 1. Scream number 2 is about digital radios. For years, you've been able to turn the dial one single click to the right to go from Radio 3 to Radio 4. I'm sure lots of us in this room spend our days gliding back and forth between those two very civilized radio stations, switching seamlessly from one to the other when either is not at its best, such as during the Life Scientific. But suddenly, an interloper has appeared. To get from Radio 3 to Radio 4, you now have to go via Radio 3 Unwind. And as the journalist Nicholas Lezard succinctly put it recently, hate to say it, but Radio 3 Unwind winds me up. It certainly does. It's an unending sequence of soft music, day and night, that you can't listen to without feeling forced to think, this is supposed to be making me unwind, but it's not working. So that's scream number 2. Scream number 3, mispronunciations on Audible. I don't know how many of you listen to books on Audible. For me, it's a new craze, actually. I'm a regular book reviewer, so I have to read a physical book from cover to cover once a week. Listening to Audible while walking the spaniel is my way of getting other books into my brain and soul without having to pass through my eyes. And I'm an admirer of the readers who do all the hard work. But there don't seem to be high enough standards of pronunciation checking. And I must say, a bad mispronunciation can ruin the experience. Here are 3 from the last month. Dorothy L. Sayers' Strong Poison, I'm sure we all love that book, is nicely narrated by Jane McDowell, who comes across as elegant and well-educated. But then, you suddenly hear her saying, he was a Balliol man. Balliol? Has she never even heard of the Oxford College? I'm afraid my confidence in her reading ability plummeted at that moment. And then, narrating John Mullen's excellent book called What Matters in Jane Austen, the narrator Charles Armstrong calls Captain Benwick. Surely that's wrong. And then my son, listening to a book about the history of football, as he does, told me the narrator kept calling Juventus. Even I, who am not at all a football fanatic, knows that its nickname is Juve, but the narrator kept saying Juve. Toby had to stop listening. Now, a few yelps of pleasure are scattered about in italics across my book screens. You'll notice them because they are in italics. They're the small delights of modern life, which give us a tingle of pleasure. One is the bliss of defying the sat-nav, refusing to go the way it tells you. That always sends it into a huge strop. It downgrades your expected arrival time and keeps instructing you to do a U-turn, but you keep refusing. And eventually, you bend it to your will, and you arrive 4 minutes earlier than it originally predicted. What a triumph. I've got you one new Yelp of pleasure for 2025. It may be familiar to anyone who uses Instagram. It's watching road sign cleaning videos. You know those filthy, grime-encrusted road signs on A roads saying things like Northampton 19? Well, a man called Liam the Sign Guy travels around the country filming himself cleaning those signs with a marvellous broom-shaped mop that gushes copious water. Watching it is a sensuous pleasure. My favourite part is when he goes round the sign for the second time, putting the finishing touches on the job, leaving it spotless. Modern life does have its Yelps of pleasure. Thank goodness. Well, briefly, before I end, I'd like to mention my debut novella, which was published last week by the excellent publishers Slightly Foxed. It's called Love Divine, and it's set in a contemporary Church of England parish in an imaginary leafy suburb of West London during an interregnum almost as long as the one we've all just sat through, waiting for them to decide who's going to be the new Archbishop of Canterbury. But I promise you that although it may contain hymns, Love Divine is not too churchy a novella. It's about a group of people who happen to live within a 2-mile radius of their parish church. There are decidedly secular things going on as well as sacred ones. The whole thing takes place within a single calendar year. One of my favourite characters, Hugh Goff, sums up the paucity of parish church facilities towards the beginning of the novel. He sees people queuing to go to the loo and thinks, one church, one faith, one loo. But that is all about to change, as you'll see. I would love you to read it. It's available not from Amazon, but it's available from Slightly Fox's website or from good bookshops such as our lovely Hatchards. I do hope you enjoy it, and it certainly looks divine. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks so much, Ysenda. Our second speaker today is Sarah Vine, a Daily Mail columnist who received Columnist of the Year in 2019. She was arts editor of the Times, and she was married to somebody called Michael Gove, a distinguished cabinet minister. I think, in fact, you are still Lady Gove, aren't you? You're not yet divorced. And she's written a brilliant memoir called How Not to Be a Political Wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Vine.
Thank you, Harry. That was brilliant. I can't wait to read it. Thank you all for coming. What a beautiful building. So yes, I'm afraid I am the Lady Gove, because neither my ex-husband nor I are very good at fitting in forms, so we've just sort of lost interest, really, in getting divorced. But the reason I wrote this book, How Not to Be a Political Wife, is because I think I had quite an interesting experience being a sort of outsider on the inside in government. When I started writing the book, actually, it was started out really as a memoir featuring really my father, and the title was going to be The Naked Car Chase, because that's something that happened to me when I was 11, involving my father and my mother and her lover. And I had this idea that I would write this sort of crazy book about my crazy childhood with my crazy father, and then it sort of blossomed from there. And when I sent my book in to the publisher, they were very nice. They quiet night, 3 or 4 days of silence, and then they came back to me and they said, "We do like the book, but we're just a bit worried that your father's going to sue you." And I said no. And so if you can imagine that of all the people in the book that might sue me, they thought it was going to be my father, you can sort of maybe get a sense of the level of kind of honesty and naughtiness that is in the book. It's a very naughty book. It's about a messy world. It's about a messy person, i.e. myself, making all the terrible mistakes that I've made and all the errors of judgment and getting the wrong end of the stick all the time, which is what I do. And it's that person being inserted into a very establishment world where full of very glamorous people and very glamorous situations, and the feeling in that, the words of that song, this is not my beautiful life, this is not, I don't belong here at all. and trying to make sense of it all and often failing. And the book sort of starts on the morning after the Brexit vote, which was probably, I suppose, I don't know if anyone here dabbles in the tarot, but it was probably my tower moment when I, fell from the top of my tower. And I wake up and I'm woken up by the smell of cigarettes outside my bedroom window. And it's all these reporters gathered outside and they're all having a morning fag and they're chatting. And I realised that my whole world is totally about to change. And it did. And, I say in the book that Brexit cost me my friendships, my sanity, my marriage. And it's, someone needs to take a pill, I think, probably. Given the audience, I'm just hazarding a guess. And I decided that, first initially I was not going to write about it because it was also kind of insane and crazy. And then about 2 years ago, I suddenly realised that if I didn't write it, it was going to sort of dog me for the rest of my life. And because I'm a writer, because I do Daily Mail columns and other columns and generally, words on pages, that's how I make sense of the chaos. And I just thought I need to get all this chaos out of my head and into a book. So if you are kind enough to read the book, you will find it is a sort of strange, mad kind of a book. And in fact, one of the things that Sandra Parsons, who is our books editor at the Daily Mail, said to me, she said, I just don't know what shelf I would put this book on in a bookshop, because it's not really politics, it's not really memoir, I don't know what it is, it's just a mad thing. But it is a sort of roller coaster ride, and what I really wanted to do was to give people the impression, to give people some understanding of why it is that politics has gone so wrong, and why it does always go so wrong. And it's to do with people, and people think of politics as a sort of technical thing, as they assume that politicians are, functional, normal human beings, but they're really not. And in fact, I'd say that they're probably the least qualified. I mean, to be a politician, you have to be such an you have to be so thick-skinned that you are almost incapable of understanding other people, because you're just such a sort of egomaniac. And the world that you operate in is so unbelievably vicious and so unbelievably unpleasant. And when people say to me, why is it that politics fails all the time? The simple answer is that if you are a politician and if you are at all near the top of the tree, 99.9% of your day is spent trying not to get fired. And then there's a tiny 1% that is spent actually doing some work. And in fact, the job of the Prime Minister is basically a non-job. I mean, literally all you're doing is just running a giant creche. And all these people are sort of rowing and shouting at each other and throwing things, and it's just a nightmare. And so the reason politics doesn't work is because the people who become politicians are just sucked into this terribly difficult machine. And I think a lot of it's to do with the modern world and social media and all of that kind of stuff. But I wanted to give the reader a sense of that chaos and to sort of try and explain basically why it is that their bins are not being properly emptied. So if you want to read it. You can also listen to it, actually. I read it. And I didn't mispronounce any words, and I even do some accents. There's some fun stuff in it, meeting Donald Trump. The best moment, actually, in my political life was probably meeting the Queen, the late Queen, which I have to say was extraordinary. But thank you all for coming. I hope you read the book. If you enjoy it, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Our last speaker, Merlin Holland, is Oscar Wilde's only grandson, the son of Vivian Holland, the younger son of the great master. Much more important than that, he was the wine critic of the Oldie. But he is a great writer and a great scholar. He's the co-editor of the Complete Letters of Oscar Wilde and the editor of the Irish Peacock and Scarlet Marquis, the first uncensored version of his grandfather's civil trial in 1895, and he's written an absolutely terrific, very moving book called After Oscar, The Legacy of a Scandal. Ladies and gentlemen, Merlin Holland.
Thank you very much, Harry. Does this bend a little? one of the troubles with okay, one of the troubles with being the last on the list is that one sometimes enjoys one's lunch too much, and if the speaker enjoys his lunch too much, then the diners don't enjoy the speaker. But I will try and condense this monster of a book, which, as I've said to somebody, took me 15.6 times the gestation period of an African elephant, is difficult in 10 minutes, but I shall do my best to do it and not overrun. I was never going to write this book. It was not something which I felt viscerally obliged to do for my family. It came about more or less by accident. As a child, I was always discouraged from taking an interest in Oscar Wilde. It was the 1950s and the 1960s, a period of really quite disgusting homophobia in British history, let alone admitting that I was in any way related to him. I was coached by my parents to say, if anybody asked, was I related to Oscar Wilde, to say, yes, but he died a very long time ago and I never knew him, and change the subject. So during the 1950s, when my father went bankrupt because of Stafford Cripps, known in the family as Stifford Craps, imposed as Chancellor of the Exchequer the one-off special levy, which was basically a tax on unearned income. My father, like most self-employed people, was paying his tax next year with the income of the year after. And so by 1950, they made him bankrupt. My mother offered to pay it off, and they would have been well advised to accept her offer, except that I have always assumed, perhaps wrongly, but not unreasonably, that the British establishment, having stuck Oscar Wilde into prison in 1895, was going to get an extra pound of flesh out of my father. He appeared with my mother on the front page of the Daily Mail, dressed in evening dress, with my mother with a fur stole, front page of the Daily Mail, photograph, Oscar Wilde's son faces Carey Street. And they even managed to bring in my mother's association with Buckingham Palace as the Queen's beauty advisor. So, understandably, I was protected, I think, by my mother, is the best way of putting it, against the incursions of the press into our